My mother threatened to come get me like I was a runaway teenager, and for one humiliating second I almost let her convince me that building my own life was the same thing as destroying it. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment when she said it, my back against the kitchen cabinets, my boyfriend in the other room pretending not to listen while giving me privacy that no longer felt private. "You are not staying there," she kept saying. There was something terrifying about hearing your own mother talk to you like you were suddenly incapable of making decisions, especially when part of you still wanted her approval badly enough to doubt yourself. I remember staring at the security deposit receipt on my phone while she cried and accused and panicked through the speaker. $1,650. A housing deposit. That was all it was. But somehow, in her mind, it became evidence that I was being manipulated by a man. By the end of the call, I felt filthy. Not because I had done something wrong, because I suddenly felt watched. I think that was the moment I understood adulthood does not arrive gradually for some people. Sometimes it arrives all at once, through conflict, through disappointment, through hearing someone who loves you speak to you like they no longer recognize you. The worst part was that I understood her fear. That is what made everything so emotionally confusing. If she had been cruel all my life, it would have been easier. But my mother loved me intensely. Suffocatingly sometimes. She was the kind of woman who checked weather forecasts in cities I traveled to, the kind who still reminded me to eat vegetables when I was in college, the kind who believed worry was proof of devotion. Growing up, I mistook her anxiety for wisdom. It took me years to realize those are not always the same thing. When I was younger, I actually liked how involved she was. I liked being needed. Being the good daughter became part of my identity so early that I never questioned it. I got good grades. I called home often. I rarely rebelled. Even my mistakes were polite. So when I moved away after college to gain healthcare experience before applying to graduate programs, I think my mother believed it was temporary in an emotional sense too. Like eventually I would orbit back into the exact life she imagined for me. Then I met Eli. And that changed things in ways I did not fully understand myself. Not because he controlled me. Honestly, the irony is that he was the first person who ever encouraged me to make decisions without guilt. Sometimes I resented him for that. He would ask simple questions that made me uncomfortable. What do you want? Not what made sense. Not what made everyone proud. Not what avoided conflict. What did I want? I was embarrassingly bad at answering. Even now, I still am sometimes. Our relationship grew quietly, slowly. No dramatic beginning, no obsession, which almost made it feel more dangerous because it felt real. We cooked dinner together, studied together, walked through grocery stores arguing about meaningless things. Normal intimacy terrified me more than chaos ever had. I kept waiting for him to become controlling or manipulative because my mother talked about relationships like they were traps women accidentally fell into, especially serious ones. So every time I became happier with him, part of me also became more anxious. I hate admitting this, but sometimes after spending wonderful weekends together, I would call my mother and subtly downplay how serious things were. I wanted to protect my happiness from her fear. That sounds unfair to her. Maybe it is, but my mother had a way of reacting to my independence like it was personal rejection. Every decision I made away from her somehow became evidence I loved her less. When I extended my stay for another year to strengthen my healthcare applications, I already knew she would panic. I rehearsed the conversation for days beforehand. I thought if I explained everything logically, she would calm down. My financial plan, my work schedule, my savings, my career goals, the relationship. I approached the conversation like a presentation because deep down I still believed I needed permission disguised as understanding. That was my mistake, not the decisions themselves. The mistake was believing I could manage her emotions carefully enough to avoid conflict entirely. I overloaded her all at once, and honestly, I think I overwhelmed myself too. The second she heard extra year and boyfriend together, the entire conversation emotionally collapsed. After that, nothing I said mattered anymore. She interrupted constantly. "You changed. You're hiding things. This is not how we raised you." That sentence hurt more than I expected. Not how we raised you. As if adulthood itself was betrayal. I became defensive almost immediately. Then guilty for being defensive. Then angry for feeling guilty. It was exhausting. At one point she mentioned the bank transaction she saw connected to the shared account. That made my stomach drop. I suddenly felt 14 again instead of 22. I explained calmly that it was a security deposit for housing. She did not believe me fully. Or maybe she did not want to. Fear had already built its own story in her mind. I could practically hear her imagining me financially trapped by some manipulative man. Meanwhile, Eli was literally washing dishes in the next room asking if I wanted tea. The disconnect between reality and her imagination became almost surreal. Still, part of me questioned myself afterward. That is what people do not talk about enough when parents react strongly. Even when you logically know you are being reasonable, their fear enters your bloodstream anyway. For days afterward I could barely focus. I reread my own budget spreadsheets at midnight trying to prove to myself I was responsible. I started mentally listing every practical decision I had made as if preparing evidence for a courtroom. I even caught myself looking at Eli differently, not because he changed, because my mother's panic infected me. I hated that. I hated how quickly guilt could distort love. One night I apologized to him for causing drama. He looked confused. "You didn't do anything wrong." But I did not fully believe him. I was raised by a woman who made emotional harmony feel like my responsibility. If someone was upset, I instinctively searched myself first for wrongdoing. That habit followed me everywhere, even into adulthood, even into love, especially into love. A few days after the fight, my father called me. That scared me more than my mother screaming had. My father rarely involved himself emotionally. Growing up, he stayed quiet during conflicts. Sometimes I resented him for it. Sometimes I envied him. His voice sounded tired. He asked if I was safe. I suddenly started crying so hard I could barely answer. Not because I was unsafe, because nobody had asked me that gently all week. I kept waiting for him to pressure me into coming home. But instead he just listened quietly while I explained everything again. The apartment, the career plans, the gap year, the shared bank account, the housing deposit, the relationship. At one point I said, "I feel like Mom thinks I'm ruining my life." There was a long silence. Then he sighed softly and said, "Your mother is scared of losing closeness with you. She just doesn't know how to separate that fear from control." That sentence rearranged something inside me. Not because it excused her behavior, because it humanized it. Suddenly I could see her more clearly, not just as my mother, but as a woman aging. A woman whose daughter no longer needed her in the same desperate way. A woman terrified that distance meant replacement. And honestly, there was a cruel little part of me that felt resentful toward her for that. I hated how responsible I still felt for her emotional stability. Sometimes I wanted to disappear for a week without answering texts just to feel ownership over my own mind again. Then immediately afterward I would feel horrible for even thinking that. Contradiction became my entire emotional life during that period. I missed her while avoiding her calls. I wanted independence while secretly craving reassurance. I wanted to be trusted while still emotionally acting like a child sometimes. There was one especially embarrassing moment when I almost packed my bags after another fight with her. Not because I wanted to go home, Because conflict with my mother made me physically panic. Eli found me sitting beside my suitcase crying quietly. "I don't even know what I'm doing anymore," I admitted. And the ugly truth was that part of me hoped he would decide for me. I was so tired of carrying everyone's expectations that surrender almost sounded peaceful. Instead, he said something that irritated me deeply in the moment. "You don't need to prove adulthood by suffering through decisions alone." I remember feeling angry because I wanted certainty, not nuance. But later I understood what he meant. I kept treating independence like a dramatic declaration instead of a slow emotional process. Opening my own bank account ended up feeling strangely emotional. I thought it would feel empowering immediately. Instead, I sat in my car afterward and cried. Not dramatic crying, just quiet grief. Because separation, even healthy separation, still feels like loss sometimes. People romanticize independence. They rarely talk about the loneliness hidden inside it. My mother and I eventually spoke again more calmly. Not perfectly. Calmly. She still thought I was making mistakes. I still thought she was overreacting. Neither of us fully changed the other's mind. But something important shifted when I finally stopped trying to convince her that my choices were harmless. Because adulthood is not harmless. Every meaningful decision costs somebody something. Sometimes your parents lose the version of you they imagined. Sometimes you lose the comfort of being fully understood. Sometimes love changes shape and both people grieve it quietly. I think that is what was really happening between my mother and me. Not just control, grief. And honestly, once I understood that, I stopped feeling quite so terrified. Not because everything became easy, because I finally understood that disappointing someone does not always mean you are doing something wrong.